Welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Really excited about today's guest. We've got Maria Artunduaga, CEO and founder of Samay, which is developing a really exciting technology in the respiratory space. A wearable technology is named Sylvee, which we'll get into to how you named the company and also the product here in a little bit. But thanks for joining the show, Maria.
No, thank you so much for the invitation, Mike. I'm
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
really, really happy to be here.
I think it's been about a year that I've been stalking you to get you on the show. So I feel very accomplished that we finally pulled this together here.
It's hard when
Um,
you have a daughter. She's 20 months old, it's difficult to balance it.
I'm right there with you. I've got a 22-month old, 21-month old, and a 6-year-old and an 18-year-old. So I know how busy
Congratulations.
it gets. I'm not running a startup, so I certainly don't have those challenges with my schedule. But I appreciate you carving out some time to come
Thank you.
on here, and really excited to share the technology with
Mhm.
the community. Um, you know, like I was saying before we got started here, I typically don't go into the background of guests very often. I created this podcast so that the technology could be the star of the show, and the guest, usually the CEO or the founder, is the individual that gets to come on and just tell that technology story. This is a little unique. Your background is an incredible one. I was reviewing your experience and just your story and your kind of um, the track record of how your career has unfolded last night, and I was like, wow, we have to tell this story to the audience. So the way I'd like to start, if you're okay with it, is for you to tell your story of how you got to the point where you started Semi and how it all unfolded.
Absolutely. It's a long one. I'm
I love
43 now.
it.
So my goodness. So as you can notice, I have an accent. So I'm from Colombia originally. Physician trained there. I arrived to the US in 2007. Originally, what I wanted to do was to become a reconstruct plastic surgeon for kids. Um, and at the time when I did 4 years of genetics research as a postdoc at Harvard Medical School, and I was the first Latin American woman to get into a plastic surgery program in the history of the U.S. Actually, that was 2011. When I was completing the plastic surgery residency, things weren't going too well, actually. And then my grandmother died from a condition that it's called chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It's people know it as COPD, the abbreviation, meaning it's a chronic and irreversible disease that makes breathing very, very hard for these people. And I don't know if you were affected by COVID or if you know anybody who got COVID during a pandemic, right? It's literally the same feeling, right? Like you feel suffocated, you're afraid of dying every single day, literally, and
Yeah.
then it's a complicated life to live. And I witnessed her whole journey or experience dealing with that condition all throughout my childhood, right?
Yeah, my dad
So
has mild COPD.
we need to talk.
Yeah.
So it so the problem was that one of the so being a surgeon myself or a former surgeon in training, I'm very type A personality. Like I really like solving problems. I'm like obsessed with like challenging situations and on how and working towards a solution. And to me was very shocking to find out that she passed because the way how we manage patients with respiratory conditions, regardless if it's COPD, could be asthma, cystic fibrosis, et cetera. When they are at home, especially, we manage them by asking them questions. So we are literally like practicing medicine of 18, 1600s still. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, the questionnaires do a very good job, meaning we can like sort of like understand throughout like using a scores how they are doing, but still 50% of those exacerbate the respiratory crisis, the exacerbation, that's how we call in medicine, uh, are missed at half of them. And the more exacerbations you have, the more likely you are to die within the next 3 to 5 years. So she died because of a late diagnosis of an exacerbation event. We were living 6 hours away from her. And as you, I mean, might imagine, right? Like people, when they become older, they don't want to be, a pain,
A burden. Yeah, they
a
don't want to be a
burden to
burden.
anybody. That she wouldn't like report anything. She wouldn't say much. Obviously, and at the same time, she don't want to live with anybody. She wanted her whole independent life on, you know, by herself. So it became very problematic to the point that she was exacerbating way too often, to the point that she eventually, got admitted to the hospital and she died from complications from an ICU admission. And that's how everything started. I eventually like left my surgical career, and what I decided to do was to retrain in something that I'm very passionate about, besides obviously surgery at the time. Now it isn't anymore, which is global public health. Coming from a middle income country like Colombia, I don't know if you know this, but it's interesting the way how we do medicine is very different. So we go straight from high school into medical school for about 6 to 7 years. So I was very,
Wow.
very young when I got there. I was 16. I was 16 years old, and we because of the length of the program, we literally are trained the old way of doing things. So I was trained to do absolutely everything on my own, like sort of like emergency room physician, hospitalist,
Right.
slash everything. So I got to deliver babies, do autopsies, everything, the whole
Yeah.
thing. So I got to practice for some time, and I spent time in rural settings in Colombia, nearby where, rural mountains where people are very poor, they don't have access to technologies or resources. And I experienced firsthand a lot of the situations and clinical needs. And I thought about, okay, what if I pivot into like technology? Can I actually start creating technologies or innovate in a space that it's obviously very needed? And obviously COPD happens to be one of the most prevalent diseases worldwide. And 90% of these folks actually are dying in low and middle income countries. So that's sort of like the background story of how
Hmm.
things started with Samay. Um, it's a 5-year-old company so far, and we've been mainly funded by the federal government, NIH and NSF so far.
Yeah, you did. If I remember in our initial conversations, you've done an incredible job of grant writing and getting, funded, non-dilutive funding, which is, I think, it's often overlooked. I don't know. It's interesting because it's the clinical people that transition into industry that seem to feel more comfortable with that. I don't know why, but it seems like the clinicians that transfer over into industry make better use of grant writing and getting funding that way. I don't know if it's just because the folks that don't have that clinical training don't have they're just not aware of it, or what. But that's great that you've been able to um
But
build the
like, I
company
mean,
thus far.
I hadn't done a grant before ever in my life. So I think it's a matter of like storytelling. And I'm married to an engineer. So I can tell you for sure that I guess science people or clinicians in general are throughout their education probably better trained to like write. It
Yep.
doesn't mean that it's impossible. Actually, like everything in life, if you just practice and like educate yourself and like literally like teach yourself a lot of things, you can make it happen. I mean,
Yeah.
look at me. I'm a non-native, right, speaker. I don't write perfectly. I literally hired like 3 editors to go over my work, and they made everything beautiful and way better.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that's how.
Annalisa Samara, do you know her from
Oh, Elisa, and Elisa, of course,
yeah,
Rios. Yeah,
Rails. Yes, I
she's
interviewed.
amazing.
She's
I
yeah,
mean, like,
she's such a tour de force, man. She's incredible. She's done an incredible job with grant writing as well, and really raised a ton of money, non-dilutive funds, for Reyes. We interviewed her. It was a while back. It was well over a year ago. But yeah, she's the only other one that I know that really has made a strong effort and has had it pay significant dividends. So
yeah, she
so
figured out a way, and she's been doing it forever for other companies before. So
right.
yeah, she's like one of my role models, and I keep telling her that. I
I
text her and I'm
yeah,
like, I want to be like you.
I told her I was like, when you get done, building companies, I said you could put together a grant writing company because that is a service that I think, an advisory service that could be wildly impactful in our space. Especially for people that, if you could do it for multiple different companies, or some of these accelerators might even think about adding that into their process of teaching people how to write grants. But anyways, no, that it's such an incredible story. I know you're not the type of individual that loves to toot their own horn, but can you walk us through your accomplishments, your merit scholars, the Columbia Award? I mean, you
Everything.
literally were like, point oh 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 1% of the
Yeah.
classes that you were in. Congratulations on such continued success.
Show off.
And it's I'm sure in large part why Samay has enjoyed the success it has. So let's jump into the use case for the technology. I know, we talked about your abuela and how you got the idea. What I really like to do is I
Mhm.
like to understand what's the problem you're trying to solve, and how many patients have this. You said it's a highly prevalent disease state, COPD. Why is this such a big problem, and what is that problem that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, I'll talk about talking about this. So
A-
first of all,
and
yeah,
as a backdrop to that, one thing that I
yes.
think with these remote patient monitoring
Hmm.
technologies is I'd love to get into workflow, right? Because I know the
Hmm.
clinical workflow is oftentimes the genesis for most of these. I'm sure there's a component of that here, with patients and having to go in and get tested or whatever it is.
Yeah, so I'm not an engineer, and I always like to just say that I come from a clinical perspective kind of thing, right? Like when the company started, we didn't even have a technology. We had nothing really. It was only me. So I did a lot of customer discovery, a lot of interviews to a lot of people, and that's how I discovered that what patients wanted was so they kept telling me, Maria, I want a patch that I can put on my chest and I can get my numbers so that doctors believe that what I'm feeling is actually truth, or more importantly, if I get some sort of quantifiable information day to day so that I can make decisions based on those numbers. Because literally what I do, these people are afraid of like leaving literally every single minute,
Yeah.
is they go by how they feel, and they are very anxious and very obsessed about the weather, humidity, a bunch of other things, how they feel. And pulse oximetry, they use it a lot, even though like it's not a real fun- proxy or an adequate a proxy for lung function. So they were the ones who told us that. So I always try to pitch a company, or at least now, 2024, it might change, of course, as every setup. We are building the Dexcom for respiratory.
Got it.
So this is the prototype. It's called Sylvee. And what we are actually doing is, I don't know if you're listening to this. Oh my gosh, it doesn't have a battery. But what we do, perfect for the interview, right?
Yep.
So what it does is that we are within this prototype. On one end, we have a microarray of speakers, and on the other one, we have microphones. What we are doing is like we are making the lung resonate using audible sound. So we are repurposing hearing aid technology, but for the lung. So it isn't something extremely complicated or either too expensive. It's not an ultrasound sensor, nothing like that. We are using principles of music and software, meaning that when we inject the sound through the chest from the back to the front, we are making the lungs sing. Literally, like we
Yeah.
make it resonate at certain pitch. And when we do so, we are extracting a lot of like acoustic resonance signals, and we use a lot of mathematics and like digital signal processing, all these fancy things, right? That I don't do, by the way. I mean, we
Right.
have people that do that for me. We are predicting the numbers coming out of a hospital machine, which is a huge body, like a body box. That's how they call it. It's about $75,000. Where you sit, you go to the hospital, and you start blowing through the thing for about an hour and a half. So we are digitizing a mechanical problem using software and data. That's it. So again, I mean, we're trying to build a Dexcom for respiratory, and as you might know, continuous glucose monitoring sensors have a lot of uses, right? It could be either the way how we do this or how we sell our product eventually when it's 2 to 3 years is by partnering with solutions that use devices, right? And they provide the care. It could be a virtual pulmonary clinic, it could be a remote monitoring company, it could be a hospital readmission program that it's already working. I mean, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We know that there is a very strong presence of other companies that have raised obviously much more money than we have, and that they are very good at doing that. And for now, what we're thinking is we will just, focus on what we do best, which is the technology. So that's what we are doing. And what we'd like to do is to provide information to the patients and to the clinicians or doctors or nurses or whoever is taking care of this patient so that they can make medical management adjustments at the right time. Because right now, the status quo are questionnaires.
Yeah.
So patients with COPD or asthma. I don't know if somebody listening or watching to this podcast, literally what they do is they ask questions to any respiratory patient and they make adjustments on the way how they feel. And it obviously has 1,000 biases, right?
Yeah.
Author,
Yeah.
in fact, you know, they don't remember. I mean, there are papers on that. So, yeah,
So
numbers always better.
so I love the way you said that you're recreating a manual physical process, and you're recreating that with technology
Yeah.
and sensors. Um, what's that workflow look like? So how often does the patient have to go in for one of these tests? You said it's an hour and a half long, which seems like an
Oh
eternity
gosh.
for a test like that. But is this something that they go in monthly for, every 6 months?
So are we talking about the status quo, like the standard of care today?
Yeah, exactly.
It's Mike, it's insane. It's so literally I have a speedometer here. Huh, look at it. Okay. So this thing is the mini version of the big body box or like the big hospital machine. A lot of companies are recreating different kinds of speedometers, different color shapes, etc.
Right.
So ideally, you would like to do is to have numbers, right? Like what this little machine does, this
Right.
device. So, but the problem is that you have to put this thing on your mouth and you have to blow out forcefully for about 10 seconds, 3 times just to get a number. And then just put yourself in the shoes of these people, right? Like if they are exacerbating, if they are having an attack, or
Yeah.
more importantly, if they can barely breathe because they are always scared of like dying, they just don't do this thing. So the adherence to spirometry,
Yeah,
it's
because it
about
probably creates anxiety for them, because when they
exactly.
expel their lungs, they feel like they're suffocating. They start feeling the symptoms of COPD, so they're just going to avoid that.
Yeah, exactly. So they dislike doing a spirometry. So whenever we have, for example, conversations with pharmaceuticals, they just keep reaching out to us like, Maria, can you do lung function non-invasively, passively, more importantly? Can you just put a patch and figure out the numbers so that people forget about your patch and that's it for about 2 weeks? And we say we haven't figured that out yet. Give me about a year and a half, right? But it's definitely, we have already data that we could diagnose COPD with 90% accuracy. We can detect exacerbation biomarkers with 83%. And very recently, we found that we can detect with 80% accuracy medication efficacy, right? So, which is obviously a huge value proposition for pharmaceuticals.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, they don't do this. Doctors know that. So, we know spirometry, yeah, whatever gold standard for research papers, we don't use it. You
Yeah.
just rely on questionnaires. And also, the plethysmography machines or the spirometry machines has an additional problem, which is when you buy the machine, you need to hire a respiratory therapist to coach a patient to go throughout the whole thing, right? So And reimbursement for spirometry is very, very low. It's about $60, $50 to $60 per test. A test that it probably lasts about 8 to 45 minutes. So ROI doesn't justify it. So we have a huge problem with a spirometry access everywhere in the world, including the US, especially, a
which
rich
is
country.
why people go so long undiagnosed,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
by the time they're finally diagnosed, it's so far along that treating the
Exactly.
symptoms is different. Yeah, got it.
Ah, exactly. So I mean, there are so many problems about respiratory diseases, and I mean, I'm obviously super excited about the potential of our technology. That now my big challenge is figuring out my business model. What do
Yeah,
I need to do first? And yeah, I mean, COPD, as you were saying, so there is an estimate of 30 million people affected, 50 Americans, and half of them go undiagnosed exactly because of that. We don't have access to diagnostics. Not really.
that's unbelievable. Yeah, I knew there was a workflow issue. There always is. That is the number one thing that these wearables, and these remote patient monitoring technologies address is workflow diagnose. I call them the Obamacare products. 'Cause in the United States,
Tell me more.
everything was prior to the Affordable Care Act. The government incented people to innovate in therapeutic areas. That was
Okay.
just the way the system was set up. That was,
Okay.
and that's the way CMS reimbursed things. Diagnosis, early
Hmm.
intervention, low readmissions, all of that didn't come into play until the Affordable Care Act. And then the
Got it.
Affordable Care
Of
Act
course.
came into play, and now all of a sudden they started incenting through reimbursements, which, as we know in healthcare, follow the money, right? Wherever the
Yeah.
reimbursements are is where you're going to have innovation. And those technologies really kind of took off at that point. And so it's, as a result of that, we're seeing more and more of these diagnostic technologies that are coming in, making the diagnosis earlier, and then allowing those patients to have more success in their treatment because their symptoms, or they haven't, the disease hasn't progressed to the point where it's unmanageable. So so there's an AI ML component to this, right? Is that the secret sauce in the algorithm of replicating what results you would get from a spirometry
Yeah.
device?
So there are two approaches to this. We already have 7 patents granted. I'm very proud of that, by the way.
It's great.
So what we have patented is the use of speakers and microphones to detect air trapping. Air trapping, it's something that we are betting for, really, doing a lot of work around that. So air trapping, what is it? Air trapping is the exacerbation biomarker that has been widely studied by radiologists and pulmonologists over the past decade or so. It's a strong prognosticator for everything that can go wrong with respiratory diseases, not only COPD, so mortality, exacerbations, oh gosh, tolerance to exercise, etc., even uncontrolled asthmatics, even
Yeah.
long COVID. There are some research papers around that. So what we do is, like, when we make the lung resonate, we are understanding the respiratory cycle. We are, like, literally sort of like phenotyping the lung,
Yeah.
and we are understanding the lung with, acoustic frequencies, which is something that nobody has ever done really before. And more importantly, air trapping, because I think that's our, like, strongest differentiator, right? So obviously we haven't proven this yet. That's our homework for this year. It's to run longitudinal, like everything in medtech takes forever.
I know.
So running a longitudinal study following up exacerbation patients for a matter of 90 days or so. So they have been recently discharged from the hospital, or at least have been diagnosed with an exacerbation. And we want to be able to detect longitudinal, like, 24/7 ideally, or at least 3 to 4 times every day, air trapping and acoustic frequencies. And our main goal will be to actually see changes of acoustic resonances probably days before symptoms start to show up, or at least the diagnosis of an exacerbation is made. So that's a holy grail in
Yeah.
respiratory, and
I
And
get it.
a lot of companies are going after that. Like not only the respiratory, like
Predictive analytics, being able to
exactly.
predict an outcome before the patient's symptomatic.
So, yeah, and of course, like everything in software, you just want to keep it like secret because you don't want to like be published out there for the world. That's the reason also why we haven't published anything yet.
Hmm.
Uh, we don't want other people to like follow up, or at least not yet. So yeah, mainly what we do is crunching numbers. Like we have about 700 features right now. We are expect features meaning the way how you analyze the data, like
Hmm.
characteristics of the frequencies that we see, speed, velocity, etc., shape, etc. It's actually very exciting, very interesting. And we use mathematics and models. For now, we are doing a lot of classic modeling to actually, predict the numbers coming out of the machine, but we are in the process of implementing machine learning models as well. But we need to be careful, right? Because with FDA, they don't want a black box. They want to understand very well the algorithms. It has to be sort
Right.
of like not super complicated.
Right.
I guess within the next 5 years or so, we could probably start, probably even 2 to 3 years from now, implementing a lot of like serious AI. But we will need to have, much more data, right? Like right now, we tested about 300 subjects, and we're expecting to do at least 500 by the end of 2024, and probably 1,500 by 2025. So yeah.
Very exciting. Very exciting. Where is it at in the regulatory process, and what's the burden? Is it 510K? Is it PMA?
No, no PMA, thank you. Excuse me, please. No, we are not an implant. So there are a few things that we could do. So it's surprising. There are some strategics that are interested in using our platform as it is to run research trials, so we don't require a 510K or any sort of like FDA clearance. Like because literally we can just do these
Research
as
only.
an IRB, right?
Research use
Exactly.
only. Yeah.
So research only, and oh my gosh, I keep changing of of you know I don't know. I have to do more work this year about that. So 510K, it's definitely something that we could do. We have identified already some predicates, but it's sort of like a lower hanging fruit kind of thing that we can like launch, but we couldn't make a lot of like, claims about what is it that we do, except just like basic stuff, right?
Right.
Maybe we could do some sort of like a score that we created, sort of like what Whoop does, a lot of like consumer kind of products. But
Right.
the real deal is to actually show the numbers, right? That are medically, accepted or understood by clinicians, such as, trapping numbers, FEV1, et cetera, et cetera. And that's definitely a de novo clearance that we will need to work towards within the next 2 to 3 years. So we are doing a breakthrough designation submission soon. I don't know if it's gonna get accepted because, you know, it's getting harder and harder, but we will
Yep.
just keep trying because
Yep.
I'm very resilient. And ideally, we would like to do is to work with the FDA to understand what is it that they need. Just like when you have clients, right? Like it's the same thing, like when you
Yep.
have customers.
It's one big
Um,
consulting project.
I, yeah, I know. But I mean, I'm excited. We partner with investors that are obviously aligned to this and that they understand that it's challenging, but at least the outcome eventually will be really, really large. Our TAM is ridiculously large. And it's not only COPD, I mean, we have data from asthmatics too. So yeah, we are testing this thing on a lot of other diseases as well.
It just makes sense with these auditory sensors that, if you were to take a baseline when the patient's completely healthy, and then, and then you take an examination or an example or sample of that sound when they're unhealthy, you just got to figure out how to bridge that gap of what does that mean and how do you calculate that difference on a consistent basis. But the science is there. It's just a matter of
Exactly.
figuring it out.
So
And
Mike, I mean, like it comes down to the way how I literally came up with the idea, right? It's just physics, like,
well,
and
think
again,
about it this way. Think about it this way. When you get a head cold, right?
uh,
My voice is going to sound different now. If I get a head cold tomorrow, my voice is going to sound different
yep,
because it's going to resonate different because there's different mechanics going, there's different physics going on inside of my
Yeah,
body.
there is inflammation, there are a lot of things going on, like mucus, et cetera, et cetera. And the same thing with the acoustic resonance, right? I mean, we didn't want to do a speech because so I happen to be very privileged, and I always keep saying this. The company was inspired obviously by the story of my grandmother and our personal tragedy as a family, but more importantly, that's to the fact that I'm married to a guy who happens to be one of the leading audio experts worldwide, and he works for Google. So he's been doing it forever, like 25 years, and he's always talking about sound. Everything's weird
Yeah.
together, which is probably 15 years now. So I literally connected the dots, and I called him, and I was like, wait. So pulmonologists are telling me that they see this thing called air trapping, meaning that patients start accumulating air in tiny little pockets inside of their lungs when they are getting worse and worse and worse, and it's been associated with exacerbation strongly. So, I mean, physics, right? Like I went deja vu, totally high school physics. I remember doing this experiment. Imagine this: I'm from a very small town in Colombia, like 300,000 people. And I
Mhm.
was doing experiments back in 1995 or four. And I remember that. And I was like, Ricardo, I told him, like, what if we use acoustics? Like, can we make, implement principles of acoustic resonance to figure out anything about the lung? What if we make the lung resonate? What happens? I mean,
Yeah.
we should be able, like, there are computers that are super powerful today, things that were not available about 10 years ago. And this old machine learning, whatever, yeah.
Right.
What if you just put it there to
Yeah.
make the computer or the mathematics work out so that we can actually probably, say this is your number. I mean, that's an interesting science experiment to run,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's how everything
I
started.
think I think you're much beyond it being a science experiment at this point. I think you're
That's 5
definitely
years ago.
I definitely think you're onto something. It's super exciting. When could so when you do get FDA approval, because we're going to assume that you will, what would the
Oh yeah,
commercial
I will.
what would the I don't I wouldn't bet against you on anything. But what's the what's the commercial model look like? Is it something that you think you'd go direct? Is there a component of this that could be that could literally be an over the counter type solution?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So I always I will try to disclose that we are early in the journey, and like everything in life, right? And especially with the startups, things might change within the next 24 months, right? I mean,
Might change
ideally
in
we
the
will
next month.
also,
Yeah.
like every day, there is another fire to put out. But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of opportunity to do a lot of things. We just want to be very cautious about going crazy, like direct to consumer, over the counter. Like for me, especially, I would say yes. Let's empower people. You know,
Yeah.
people need to have access. Equity, health equity, especially. It's a matter that concerns me a lot. But at the same time, I know that, especially coming from medicine, right? Like there is a recipe, right? I rather go by the book. It's something that other people have done other verticals already, and I'm always surrounding myself with people that are wiser and more experienced than me. And the main conclusion is like, follow the traditional route. Ideally, you sell this at a very high price, obviously, to other people that are providing the services, because building a service company is very capital intensive.
Hmm.
And more importantly, I would probably bet to say that it's more difficult dealing with people, especially.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just, I mean, I
I know,
come from
trust me,
medicine.
I deal with people all day long.
Woo!
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And I'm a geek at heart. And the people that need the team mainly, it's technologists, and we are good at that. And we'd probably rather do that, right?
Yeah.
Focusing on the technology. So at least for now, that's the plan. And eventually, if we need to do over the country, like, I mean, there's a next pandemic coming up in 9 to 10 years. We probably have to do that too.
Yeah. The yeah, it's interesting because it'll be interesting to see how your economic model works out, because I can envision physicians would love to be able to ship this to the patient's home,
Yep.
not have to have them come into the office for the spirometry, not have
Yep.
to have the office staff. Just, hey, I'm going to send this to you, slap it on for 2
Like
weeks.
an iRhythm kind of
A
yeah.
100%. That's exactly where my mind went was,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, I mean, I think this would actually have a bigger clinical or workflow impact than iRhythm because there was Holter monitors. There's always
Mhm.
there's been a lot of what I would call logarithmic innovation on the
Yeah.
EKG side
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
But with this, it's still stuck in the dark age
176
with this.
years ago,
Yeah,
the
with this
spirometry was
the
invented.
patients having to come into the office and all that. So yeah, I think you've
So
got.
Mike, I love that. Honestly, like when I started seeing the results from the data team that we have, I mean, I didn't expect to have a COPD diagnosis so early on. 90% accuracy, that's our highest number up to
It's
today,
incredible.
with only 100 people. So we are trying to do actually now more tests on across the spectrum of all the disease states around COPD stage 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So yeah, so but the thing is like that's sort of like a different business model that I'll need to build. And so for me, 2024 is all about I need to figure out how to make this a real business.
Yeah. How are we going to charge for it? What are we going to charge for it? Who's going to pay for it?
Yes.
How are we going to justify it? How are we going to get
Yeah.
reimbursement? All of that.
And
Yeah.
I had an actual, conversation about that just about a few days ago with a healthcare folks month. They were like, Maria, I mean, it's great what you're doing. Now your work is like you need to sell these. What's the business model? Because you have a bunch of different ideas and you need to commit to something and figure out the whole thing. And they
Yeah.
were right. I mean, that's my homework to do with the next 2 months or so. Um, I mean,
Well,
it's interesting. At least for me, it's exciting.
you've proven to be a good student, so
Oh, I am.
I don't have any doubt that you'll do well with the homework.
I
Um,
call it my homework kid.
the I want to be sensitive to your schedule, get you out of here on time. Last question for you though.
Mhm,
Well, a question and a comment. One
mhm.
is what's next? Is there any other applications for this? I mean, I understand your head down, but is there any potential applications for this technology where you could see applying it in a different specialty or in a different, um, you know, uh, uh, a different application within the respiratory pulmonary
Asthma.
specialty? And then, I guess the comment would be, I know that you're starting to kick off some fundraising here, so
Yes.
um, congratulations on that. And for any viewers out there that are in that space, I would highly advise you reach out to her on that front. But yeah, is there any other applications you guys are looking at?
Asthmatics, definitely. It's not only a huge market, but more importantly, they are facing the same challenges.
Yeah,
I was
and it's
talking to
underserved.
exactly, especially underserved communities, Black and
Yep.
Latino, Navajo. There are a lot of opportunities to do a lot of work with that. It's sort of like a little different, the journey, the way how the pathophysiology of the disease, but that's something that we're considering. So right now, what we see is medication efficacy in a cohort of asthmatics of about 60 people that we have against controls. And we are seeing that we can actually see the medication, the therapeutic effect immediately when we compare ourselves to the FEV1 or like the gold standard we use. So we are thinking about doing a grant, a huge, like very big grant of probably 4 million or so to NHLBI by September. That's something that we are considering. We are still waiting for another score from NIH in late March. So, I mean, I like doing a lot of things. I'm very
Yeah,
diligent about, I always have a plan A, B, C, D for
yeah,
everything that I do. So we do a lot of grants. I think it's a really nice way of de-risking without having a lot of pressure on like timing on like Maria, you just raised, I don't know, whatever, 5 million, a million. And you need to deliver within the next 18 months. This takes time, right?
yeah,
We
yeah,
we are the first doing something like I always this is sort of like the EKG or the pulse oximeter technology back in the 50s. We are still doing a lot of research. This has never been done before. And I always like bring the comparison to the Genome Project where we are using, instead of snips, obviously, because I have genetics background, we are using acoustic frequencies to understand the lung, right? So
Hmm.
there's a lot of phenotyping going on. And I'm racing for that. I need more data scientists. I need more
Yeah.
data engineers. I need to really crunch my numbers well, so to discover more things.
Yeah. No, you know, you're in the second inning of a 9 inning baseball game, and it's gonna, you know, it just takes time. But
Yeah.
you know, having asthmatics and some of those other things, you know, venture capitalists will tell you they want you to be focused, right?
Yes,
But
they
but in the
say that.
same breath, no pun intended, they also like you to have multiple shots on goal. If this
Yep. Yep.
doesn't work out, we've still
Can you
got this.
pivot?
Yeah, we've still got this thing over here. So it
Yep.
makes perfectly good sense. Listen, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, T.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Always love talking with you, and definitely looking forward to getting together at LSI. And if there's any way we can help out on any front, please just give me a shout. And you know, when it gets a little closer to FDA approval, we'll get you back on the show to do an update
I love that.
to where you guys are at. So
Thank you, Mike. Thanks so
thank
much for
you.
the invitation.
Thank
I
you
really
very
enjoyed it.
much. All right, folks, that's it for this edition of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. We'll catch you on the next episode.